Hey everybody, Pastor Dean again, and we are back for week number 3 of our Signs of Life series through the Gospel of John. And as you can tell, it's Ash Wednesday, so don't mind the ashes on my forehead. I'm grateful to be able to share from John chapter 5 with you today. This will be for the message on Sunday, February 26th, which is the first Sunday of Lent. And we're going to be looking at another healing miracle today. And this one is different than the one from last week. And in fact, it is because of when it takes place and how it takes place, it's certainly different than the royal official's son being healed from last week. So I'm going to jump in and read the text. I'm going to read it in 2 parts. Read the first 9 verses and then talk a little bit about that, and then I'll read the next few verses and talk about that. So this is John chapter 5, and we're going to begin with the first 9 verses. So after this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem by the sheep gate, there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethzatha, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. So there's a couple things going on here. First of all, we've moved into a new section of the Gospel of John. So we're still in the book of the signs, but beginning in chapter 5, we've moved into what's called the festival cycle. And what you'll see between chapters 5 and chapters 10 is that time is marked off by different festivals. And so when we originally started back in chapter 2, so when Jesus cleanses the temple, which was immediately following the water turning into wine at the wedding in Cana, verse 13 of chapter 2 says the Passover of the Jews was near. So that was the first festival that was mentioned. So now we now have what scholars call the festival cycle. And so there will be festivals that are mentioned in chapters 5 through 10, and they mark time in the Gospel of John. And so this one in chapter 5 is not named. Most likely it's the Festival of Tabernacles or Booths or Sukkot, but it's not really known. Later, the Festival of Passover will be mentioned again, and so you can see the years progress, and typically this is where we get the understanding and the timeline of Jesus being in ministry for 3 years, is that there are 3 Passovers that are mentioned in the Gospel of John. And so therefore scholars just make that connection that he was in ministry on earth, in full ministry on earth for 3 years with his disciples. So, but here in chapter 5, we have a festival that has begun. And because there's a festival, Jesus has gone up to Jerusalem. And so he goes to Jerusalem, and verse 2 tells us, in Jerusalem by the sheep gate, there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethzatha. I have a note in my Bible, in the NRSV, that says that other ancient authorities read Bethesda and others Bethsaida. And so it just depends on perhaps your particular translation, what they put there. But Bethzatha in the NRSV is a literal it's a transliteration from the Hebrew or from the Greek. So and it has 5 porticos. Porticos are basically these little sort of covered areas that surround this pool around the sheep gate. Now, you can, if you go and visit the Holy Land right now, then you can see how you can see this pool. This you can go to the sheep gate and you can find this pool. And so I have a map here real quick I want to show you. This is from a resource that I have, but that has a bunch of biblical maps. And so what you'll see is that you can see the temple in the center of the picture in the yellow on the right-hand side. You can see where the Temple Mount is. And then just north of that is the Sheep Gate. And the Sheep Gate is where that's referenced. And then just above that, there's Israel's pool, and then there's a two-pieced, two-sectioned pool, and this map has it with a text box pointing toward it, where Jesus healed a paralytic man, and at the pool of Bethesda is the way that they described it. But so that's the pool there, and it's still there. You can see the ruins of it if you visit the Holy Land, visit Jerusalem. You can see it in person if you go there. So I'll probably show this picture on Sunday, as well as a different picture from our current from current excavation. So there's the sense that so this is a real place. So this adds to the authenticity of not only John's gospel, but of Jesus's miracle here with this man. So there's 5 porticos that are around it, basically these covered areas, and invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed would be around there. And there was this sort of rumor or sort of legend that every once in a while the water would get stirred up. It'd start bubbling or something like that. It would get agitated, essentially. And the folklore was that the first person into the water, following that the water getting stirred up, would be healed. And so people would bring their family members or whoever, or even themselves, in anticipation of the water being stirred up and being able to get the first one in. So now, the man that Jesus meets has been there for 38 years. 38 years he's been here by the pool, and Jesus sees him, and he knows that he's been there a long time. And so he looks this man in the face and he says, "Do you want to be made well?" Basically, he's pointing to him, and he's very pointedly asking, do you really want to be made well? Or are you content to just lay here and make excuses for why you're not well? And so the man then basically attests to the fact that that he has been unable to get into the water when it gets stirred up. So he believes the folklore. So he says, "I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up or agitated. And while I'm making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." So he believes that if he's the first one in, then he'll be able to be healed. But he has no one to put him in into the water when it's stirred up. So Jesus, point blank, looks at him and says, instead of waiting for the water to be stirred up, instead of stirring it up himself and putting him in, Jesus looks at him and says, "Stand up, take up your mat, and walk." So in this moment, Jesus does what the water is purported to be able to do, which is to heal him. But Jesus does it with a word. And so the man stands up, takes his mat, and begins to walk. He's healed right there, instantaneously, with the word of Jesus. And so again, verse 9, At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. So Jesus' word, just the same as with in the paragraph in front of that, with the royal official and his son being ill, with the word of Jesus, his son was made well, and with the word of Jesus, this man is made well. The difference being that the son was a 2-day journey away in Capernaum. This man, who's been lame for 38 years, is right in front of Jesus, and yet the same word from Jesus' mouth heals them both, and does so immediately. So that's that's the first part. Now, the complicating factor for this particular healing is that it takes place on the Sabbath. So we read the second half of verse 9 and continuing. So this is beginning in the last part of verse 9, and I'm going to keep reading through to verse 18. So now that day was a Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat." But he answered them, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Take up your mat and walk.'" And they asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take it up and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Therefore, the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is still working, and I also am working." For this reason, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, but was also calling God his own Father, thereby making himself equal to God. So this man is healed. And it isn't until the end of the story, after the healing takes place, that John tells us, hey, it was a Sabbath. And Sabbath regulations were fairly tight in that no work was supposed to be done. And there were parameters around that, but no work was to be done on the Sabbath, including healings. And including carrying your mat. You weren't allowed to you were allowed to take so many steps and not anymore. You weren't allowed to carry anything with you. So when the Jews, and that's just a general term for Jewish people in this context, when they see that this man is carrying his mat, he's automatically breaking the Sabbath. But what he does is he says, "This man who healed me," he doesn't name him Jesus at this moment, said to take up my mat and go from where I was. And so they ask him, "Well, who was it that told you to take up your mat and walk?" And he doesn't really know. Then Jesus finds him in the temple later, and he says, and Jesus tells him that he says, "See, you have been made well." So he says, "Don't sin anymore, so that nothing bad happens to you." Because oftentimes in the Hebraic understanding of sickness and illness and paralysis and whatever it is, oftentimes they attributed it to sin. And so ill health of some kind was often attributed to sin. And so this man who's been ill for 38 years, must have done something. And so Jesus tells him, whether he believes that this man has sinned and that's what caused him to do it or not, tells him to, basically to go and sin no more, which is another phrase that Jesus uses in the Gospels. But so that nothing worse happens to you. So then this man who's been healed goes back to the Jews and says it was Jesus. So he, first of all, he tells them, "I don't know who it was, but he told me to take my mat up and walk." And so then he goes back to them and he says, "Hey, it was Jesus. And he told me to do this." And so the Jews get upset with Jesus. And they, so therefore, verse 16, says, therefore the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath. So the first reason they begin to persecute Jesus in this moment is because he has healed someone on the Sabbath. He's now a quote unquote Sabbath breaker. But then Jesus has a conversation with them, and we only hear Jesus' side of it. He says, my Father is still working, and I am also working. So, so now, not only do the Jews feel like he's a Sabbath breaker, now they rightly discern that Jesus has equated himself with God. And now they say, for this reason, John tells us, for this reason, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him. So this is a secondary reason, because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, but was also calling God his own Father, thereby making himself equal with God. And therefore, this would be a charge of blasphemy. So not only is he a Sabbath breaker, but now he's equating himself with God and calling himself the Son of God, and making himself equal to God. And this is just the first of what will occur over the next few chapters of this growing and this growing discontent that the Jews have with Jesus, that will ultimately end in his trial, crucifixion, and his death, because he says he is the Son of God, and it hinges on these charges of blasphemy. And so over the next few chapters, watch as the conflict between Jesus and the Jews begins to intensify. We'll see it we'll see it greatly in chapter 9 when we get to another healing miracle, but we will see it again as he heals Lazarus in chapter 11, and which leads directly into John's commentary on Holy Week. So just watch for this to intensify. Now, here's the sign in this chapter, in first part of chapter 5. We see that Jesus continues to have power to heal people, and now not only does a family, the disciples, and then a family, now this group of Jews hear the testimony of this man who's been lame for 38 years, tell about Jesus and how he told him to take up his mat and walk. Then they hear from Jesus' mouth that he and the Father are still working, so therefore making himself equal to God. Now they're hearing it, and so the circle widens even farther, and Jesus's glory is beginning to be revealed in clearer and clearer terms, that he and God are one with each other, and that he is indeed the Messiah. And so this is going to push the Jews further and further towards finding a way to arrest him, finding a way to silence him, and ultimately it comes to an ultimate head in the crucifixion. So so this is the third sign that we see. And I want you to notice that from here to the end, here to Lazarus, they're not numbered. The signs aren't numbered anymore. We have to pay attention to them. We've been given the framework. There were the two in Cana, the water into wine and the healing of the official. And now we have to count them on our own. So this is number 3. And so just begin to pay attention, or continue to pay attention to the ways in which Jesus is revealing his glory. Jesus is, the work that he's doing is beginning to spread farther and farther, and more people are understanding and coming to believe in who he is. So that's what I got for so far for this weekend. I pray that this has been helpful for you. And if you have any questions, if you need some resources or whatever, just feel free to reach out. Happy to help however I can. Um, and if you're watching this on Ash Wednesday, we have worship at 6 o'clock tonight. We'd love to have you out here, and for you to begin the season of Lent with a few moments of repentance, contrition, and worship. And so we invite you to come for worship tonight at 6 in the worship center. We had a few folks who came through this morning and this afternoon for drive-through ashes, and I'm grateful for those folks. But this evening at 6, we will join together for worship on this Ash Wednesday. So God bless you. I appreciate what you do, and if you need anything, please feel free to reach out. Thanks.